So back in the 90s, when we used really slow Ethernet and we ate dirt, if you wanted to look at packets on your network, you had the following choices. I mean, you had a bunch of other choices as well, but these were the big names, and these were the ones that kind of stuck out for me when I was writing this presentation. You know, the most well-known capture and analysis tool was Sniffer, which was its own hardware device, and it was kind of pricey. Actually, it was very, very pricey. But you had a bunch of other products like NetX-Ray and EtherPeak and Lanalyzer and Monitor, and NetX-Ray went on to become Sniffer again. The ones that I dealt with were TCP-dump and Snoop, and that's because I ran Linux and Solaris where I worked. TCP-dump and Snoop are great. I actually still use them, especially TCP-dump from time to time, but they're command line tools. They don't let you interactively browse packets and dig down. You know, the tools up above do that. So I had these, and I wanted something more like those, you know, the ones above, the ones in the middle. And after sitting down and working for a while, I ended up with this. This is the earliest screenshot I could find of Ethereal. It's dated June 28th, 1998, almost 20 years ago by, a couple of days. And does it look familiar? It should. It's what we call nowadays a minimum viable product. It's the minimum amount of code that constitutes something that does the job. And you could capture packets with it, you could browse them, you could save files out and load files and so on. You couldn't do much more than that, but you'll have to bear with me. I tested this earlier and it almost kind of didn't work right. There we go. This looks familiar. This is Wireshark. This is like a built yesterday copy of Wireshark using the same exact capture file, same packet. And yeah, there's some colors, there's a display filter entry, there's a toolbar, but you have Unicode in the column titles you can put in, and I have a column that shows delta time as category 6 miles because I wrote a Lewis script that does that. But those three main widgets are still there. You still have the packet list and the detail and the byte view. So there is some sort of familiarity there. There we go. That's a good thing because we've had a nice consistent user interface for 20 solid years. That's also a bad thing because, this is the best we could do. I had two main goals when I started the project. The primary goal is to look at packets on my network. I was at an ISP and I needed to do my job. I needed to troubleshoot the network. But I also wanted to contribute back to open source because I'd used the open source software quite a bit at that point. I worked at a university prior to that and we used open source and made a lot of use of it. And this just seemed like a good way to give back. And as it turns out, that second goal had a huge effect on the first one. After I made the first initial release, it was July 14th, 1998. So July 14th is actually the 20th anniversary of the project. But after I made that release, I started getting contributions from a lot of other people, mostly from people who used Unixes. And if you've used, kind of the old style Unixes, you probably don't do it nowadays, but people use like HPUX, NAIX, and IRIX, and DGUX, and so on. But thanks to the work of a couple of guys who I later worked with, named Laurie Stagiani and Gianluca Vereni, they ported libpcap to Windows, which let you then port Ethereal to Windows, which kind of caught me off guard because I didn't use Windows at the time. But we started getting patches from people who developed on Windows, and we got Windows support going. That's fine. So the goals kind of expanded. The goals expanded to include macOS users because Apple at the same time was transitioning from the beautiful yet horrible old classic macOS to macOS 10, which is not only effectively Unix, it's technically Unix. It's past the single Unix specification, so it's officially Unix. Laura's not here, but I also started getting email from this person named Laura. She taught packet analysis courses, and she wanted to use Ethereal in her coursework, and so who am I to say no? I got email from college professors and authors and a lot of other people who wanted to incorporate and teach using Ethereal. And so our goals kind of expanded to include them. And so as it got more complex, it actually collapsed down into one single new goal, which is to help as many people as possible understand their networks as much as possible. And that's been our goal since. So getting there is simple enough. There are two simple concepts. The IETF has this notion of a rough consensus in running code when they develop their standards. At least they used to. I don't know if they still do. But developing software, and especially developing open source software, you have the same kind of general concepts. You need working code. That's the thing that matters. And to get to the working code, you need to work with others. You need a community. And that's kind of, those have been continuing themes throughout the entire project. Early on, working with others and working code meant this. In the first year of the project, I made 30 releases. In the first 2 months of the project, I made 20 of those releases. And that's because I was the revision control system. People sent me patches, I applied the patches to the code, I made a release, then they downloaded that code. And that's how everybody stayed synced up. That's a horrific way to run a software project. And so we very quickly set up what's called a CVS server. It's the central server that lets everybody checking code to the same place, so that there's a lot less dependency on one person. And that worked out pretty well. Nowadays, instead of 30 releases a year, we shoot for a major release every 6 weeks. But we also have this kind of rapid release cycle where somebody checks in code and you can immediately download it, and we have automated build servers that build packages and whatnot. So when I talk about a patch, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. A patch is a pretty simple concept. If you have some code, it doesn't matter what the code is, which is why I put gray bars up here. The code could be C, Python, HTML, whatever. It's just going to be lines of text. A patch is another piece of text that says, okay, go to the first bit of text and do some combination of taking out lines and putting new lines in, and you're done. It's a very simple concept, but it gets pretty complex. If you attach a date and an author and a description to a patch, you suddenly have what's called a commit. If you have two people putting in patches on the same piece of code at the same time, you have a collision, and you have to manage that. And this is what actually takes up a lot of our time doing development. Aside from the actual writing code, there's the task of getting the code into the common source code repository. And so the thing to take away from here is that Wireshark and pretty much every other piece of software we use is just a big pile of patches. Wireshark is a big pile of 20 years worth of patches. And at least that's how I look at it. And so as developers, we make a really big fuss about how we manage these patches and manage these changes. And like I said, initially it was just me doing patches, then we switched to CVS, then we switched to a tool called Subversion. Nowadays we use Git and a web interface called Gerald to manage that. And just to put into context how much of a fuss developers make about managing patches, consider that Microsoft recently bought GitHub for $7.5 billion. And it's just a website that lets you do this. So, we're really fussy about this. Enough about me talking about patches. How about we bring the guys who make the patches up on the stage? These are some of the core developers of Wireshark. You may have seen them yesterday if you were in Laura's class. Jim. But yeah, these are Wireshark's. Yeah. Okay, why don't we start at this side? Janice, I think, her idea was to have you guys talk about just, what got you into network analysis and what got you into the project, or, whatever you'd like to share.
Fran still has 0-0 on the screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we have a bit of a distraction going on because World Cup's going on right now during the keynote, so we're losing out to that.
The majority of the developers on the stage are European, so we run 45 minutes behind the ball, not dropping, catching, dropping, catching. Yeah, my name is Ruth. I'm one of the co-developers. I'm rather a young co-developer in that regard. Been doing network analysis for the better part of now 8 years, mostly industrial automation. First contact with Ethereal was pretty soon, 1999, 2000, somewhere around that time at the university. My story, I think, is pretty much the same story as most of us guys. I had a problem I wanted to fix, and most other colleagues told me that's not possible. And I, being a stubborn person as I am, said, well, let's see about that. Turned out it was way harder than I anticipated, but it was doable and was way more fun than I thought it would be. Yeah, but I'm not really a network analysis guy, so I'm nowadays more in the area of GUI operations and making dialogues, making new stuff, display filter buttons, something like that. So I'm more on the GUI end of the project right now. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Daria. I'm from Italy, and I am like enrolled in one of the last core developers and joined the team. And what I'd like to share is basically how I began to develop Wireshark. I was working heavily with the DNS at the time, and I needed to filter a bunch of packets using a filter that didn't exist at the time. So what could I do? Basically do it myself. So I decided to create a patch and send to the project, and it was bounced and then reviewed again and again until it was merged. And so I was done. I modified the software to fit my need. And basically, this is how the open source world works. So you have access to the source code, you can change it, and your change will be merged. In this sense, the Wireshark community is very open because we are very open for your contribution. And there are many other open source projects outside that don't behave this way. They are open just in the sense that the source code is open, but the community is not that open. In this sense, the Wireshark community is very open. So if you can develop, you can push a change, and if it fits some of the rules that Wireshark has, it will be accepted. So your patches are more than welcome. So that's how I began to develop the project.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm from the Netherlands. When I started with the project, actually I had a problem with the software. So as a user, I was using the project to understand the application better. But for some reason, it didn't exactly work when I followed the steps. So my problem was I had some web service which was using HTTPS, like encrypted communications, and I couldn't decrypt it. Well, being open source, why not just grab the source, have a look, try to track down what went wrong. And well, easy enough, found the issue, fixed it, and then proposed it back to the project. And well, the turnaround time was pretty quick. The interaction with the older developer was also a very nice experience. So over time, I was like, oh, I find other issues, and I tried to learn about them and try to address them. So that's how I got more and more involved in the project. And what my experience with this team is, they're like very great people, very nice to work with. And also there are many other channels where users have questions or where they get involved with great ideas, and that's something I really like about this project. And going forward, yeah, there's also a lot of new features that can be implemented, security vulnerabilities that may exist, and Wireshark is a great project to test all kind of new approaches and learn a lot and make it overall better. So yeah, that's something I really like about it.
Hi, I'm Richard, and I first got involved with Wireshark in 1999, I believe. I was teaching TCP/IP courses at the time, and we used a really horrible DOS-based packet analyzer that required that, so we mostly ran Windows 95, I recall, during the class, but to do these exercises where students had to look at packets, we had to boot into DOS, run up the analyzer and capture some packets or use already captured stuff. And so this annoyed me greatly. And I had a fair amount of Linux experience at the time. And I recall I was traveling to Hobart from Adelaide, because I come from Australia, for a conference. And I started, I think, coding my first dissector for TFTP, probably, in the Qantas Club Lounge in Adelaide. And by the time I got back from Hobart, like 2 or 3 days later, I'd finished the dissector and had passed it on. And then with the work of Graham, I think, in getting Ethereal at that stage to run under Windows, I was within 6 months, I think, we transitioned away from that horrible DOS program and used the Windows version, even though I couldn't build them. So anyway, I've continued to work on dissectors since that time, with some time away with various other projects.
Hi, my name is Anders. I work for Ericsson. We're in the telecom business. My first contact with Wireshark was back in 2003 when we started to have systems that communicated over IP. There was a colleague that showed me this open source tool where you could see the packets. And we found some bugs in the telecom protocols and started to send in packages, and haven't stopped since. So
Can you pass it down?
I do a lot of the telco protocols. I think I've written up to 50 dissectors by now.
Hi, my name is Pascal. I'm from France. I think the first time I played with Ethereal by that time was around 2002 or 3 to analyze a TCP stream, like plenty of people. And then I kept away because I was working for a mobile phone manufacturer and working on the protocol stack that runs the wireless exchange with the network. So that basically nothing to do with TCP/IP. Then in 2008, I discovered that Wireshark could be used to something else rather than only analyzing the traditional network protocols. It could be used to decode the wireless protocols also. So I started contributing to enhancing the decoding of the GSM frames and so on, and I started submitting patches, and at some point, Anders got pissed off reviewing my patch, and I was proposed to join the core team in 2012. And since I've been just continuing contributing to those wireless protocols because it's my main job, but I also started just providing fixes for whatever bug report you can make, and also improving the decoding of USB frames nowadays, where you have some mobile broadband interface and this kind of things.
Morning, everyone. My name's Graham. I work for a SCADA software company, and that was how I first came to Ethereal in 1999. SCADA protocols originally were serial links, and they started moving over to IP links, which meant I could use Ethereal to capture that traffic. Primarily a Windows developer, and at the time Ethereal didn't allow us to do live capture on Windows. So that was my first involvement, trying to get that to work for Windows, submitting patches, and a few years later I was asked to join the core team. So nearly 2 decades of Wireshark experience. My rate of contribution to the project has slowed off a little bit, but then I also hang around a lot on Ask Wireshark, helping and editing questions and formatting them so they lay out nicely, and generally just trying to help within the community, which I think, as others have said, is a fantastic community to be part of, both as a developer and as the users. You guys are all very knowledgeable in your own fields, even though you've come here to learn more. And speaking to you at SharkFest is a fantastic experience. listening to your problems. It gives us ideas where we can go with Wireshark, and sometimes even being able to help you guys out.
Good morning from me as well. I'm Saka. I'm also from the Netherlands, and my journey with Wireshark started in, I guess, also in 1999 or maybe early 2000, when a colleague of mine at a large bank that I was working for showed me Ethereal, and yeah, I've been using it ever since. And it started, small, and then on the Linux, I guess, and or on the Windows, and then in 2006, I needed a feature that wasn't there, and first I thought, okay, I'm going to ask for it, and since I'm a networking guy, I don't have that much programming experience, that seemed to be the best choice. But then I thought, well, it's open source, let's see what I can do, and I downloaded the source, I looked where I needed to change something, did an intelligent copy and paste, and then got my first feature in, and that kind of got me addicted. And whenever I needed something and it wasn't there, I started developing it, looking at something in Wireshark that resembles what I needed to have, copying the code, changing it to my desire, and then putting it in. And I was developing on Linux while I was using Ethereal on the Windows. So every time I pushed in the mailing list, and after an hour or a day, I started bugging them, like, put it in because I need the Windows build, and so they got annoyed and let me in the core team. That was like in 2007, and yeah, it's been a great journey so far with each of you. I mean, in SharkFest 2008, we met for the first time live, and that also changed my life because I was like 10 years ago almost. I started working for myself as a consultant in network troubleshooting, which is partly because this journey started like 20 years ago. So it's great to be part of the ecosystem, although my efforts in developing or my efforts on ask.wireshark.org have diminished a little, or quite a bit. It's still great to be part of the community, teaching classes here, meeting each other, and promoting that people should use their programming experience, even if it's very little, to start developing as well. So it's an invitation to you guys you must have some programming experience. It's not that hard to get started. So if you need any help, well, we're here. And yeah, that's it.
There's also many other opportunities to contribute to the product. By coming to SharkFest, you contribute. Ask Wireshark, you can both ask questions, answer questions there with your knowledge, and also submit enhancement requests, documentation improvements. Everybody can help all around. And the Wireshark, the product itself, is the sum of all the contributions of everybody. And that's what makes it such a fantastic project to be involved with.
Stole mine. One more thing, because some guy in the back I saw had Scylla open, and yay to you, whoever you are. That's building on what Graham just said. There's a guy sitting here in the front row who's way too shy to come up here, but he's one of our Scylla heroes. Jim, you might as well just stand up.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So he's one of those guys who's considered a core, but he's not really developing that much anymore or at all. But he's submitting bug reports, he's testing stuff, he's adding to the documentation, he's answering and asks. So this is really a big part of the community. Going onto Scylla, entering things that annoy you. Yesterday, if you have been in Laura's class, you know that one of the biggest motivations for us is our annoyance level with the program. And that's just our annoyance level. That not necessarily has to match your annoyance level in some certain areas. So if you have something to add, please tell it to us. We're very nice. It might as well be a big chance that
I wouldn't say very.
Okay, we're somewhat nice. You can increase the level of niceness by bringing beer. But there's a very good chance if you get us interested in an issue that we fix it right away. Yeah. For instance, Laura is no longer complaining about display filter buttons, so that's, or at least not that much anymore. So come to us, send us the emails, send us Scylla reports. We're very happy to take up on them, and just keep up being the awesome audience for our program that you are. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. As I said, we'll be in the developer den, or at least around and about, throughout the course of the conference. So if you have a question or just want to stop by and say hi, you're more than welcome to. So something I focus on, as part of my role, is managing this project. I've been managing an open source project for 20 years now. I don't really write about it or talk about it except here at SharkFest, because there are a lot of other people who have written much more eloquently than I ever could about open source software project management and software management in general. But there are a few things that I've noticed that have really made a big difference and helped us move this project further along and make it what it is today. The first one being shipping working usable code, like I said a few slides ago. In our case, that means we can't just dump a tarball on you and tell you to go compile it, which is what some projects can do. We have to ship you a working usable, if you're on Windows, a working usable Windows installer. And it has to be signed so that Windows doesn't complain. It has to include a capture driver, because otherwise it would be halfway useless, because you can capture packets. So we include WinPCAP, and we might include NPCAP in the future. If you're on Mac OS, it's similar. We have to sign that installer and have something you can click on. And Linux, on Linux side, the various Linux distributions do a great job of packaging up Wireshark for us, but we try to help them as much as possible. The other thing is that community is everything. This project lives and dies by its community. And so, part of my job over the years has been to make sure that community works well and is supported. And part of that is that we have a vast robot army. We have a lot of work to do, so it makes sense to automate that as much as possible. We have an automated build system that builds packages for us. We used to do that manually, but we stopped doing that a long time ago, and now we have a build bot. We have, for our infrastructure, we do a lot of orchestration and automation, and we've done that even before tools like Chef and Puppet existed. And that's kind of nice. The big thing for a project of our size is that stuff costs money. I mean, we can't just, nowadays, if you want to start an open source project, it's easy. You go to GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, you check in your code, and you can hook into all these free services that support your project. And we've kind of grown, we grew beyond that years ago. We had to have our own infrastructure for various things, like our build system and all of our other stuff. Plus, I prefer to host stuff ourselves. And so one of the big pieces of useless advice I can give you if you run an open source project is to magically get an awesome sponsor, because that's what we have. We're very fortunate, and I'm very grateful that we do have a company like Riverbed sponsoring the project. We have, like I said, this infrastructure. We host most of our stuff at AWS. That costs money. My salary costs money, but my spouse is in the back, and she's certainly happy that Riverbed is sponsoring this project, because I get to make a living that way. They pay Janice's salary as well. SharkFest costs money, and that's why we have a bunch of sponsors here. So this is the point in the keynote where I tell you that you should maybe go visit the vendor booth and talk to those people, because they are contributing. They're doing their part in sponsoring this project. Probably the last thing, and this is actually something that people who do write about managing open source projects, they don't really mention this. Sometimes you don't fit in. Wireshark is an unusual project. Most open source projects nowadays are somebody writing a lot of JavaScript and shoving that through your web browser. And that's fine. That's just how a lot of software is developed today. A lot of development is focused on mobile application, and that's fine too. I love all the apps on my phone, but we are a desktop application, and we're written in C and C++, and we're in this little niche of network analysis. And that kind of sets us apart in those ways. And so when I go to other conferences, I don't have a lot in common with people at other open source software conferences, because they might be focused on Linux, whereas we do a lot of Windows and Mac development. We do Linux as well, but it's just that loss of commonality, and that's actually okay with me. I'm didn't fit in high school. Why should I fit in as an adult? So. When I talk about shipping code to your desktop, one of the big things, and one of the things that's kind of been a challenge over the years for me is getting that software delivered to you. Early on, I tried various things. I tried to host our downloads myself, and that didn't work. And so I talked to my boss and asked if we could host the server at work. But this was back when, if you could get a T1 for $500 a month, you were doing awesome. And this was, even back then, I could saturate a T1 like that just by doing a new release and having everybody going and get that new release, even though it was just source code. So I moved from that to, the goal is to check off all these boxes. You want reliable downloads, you want it to be cheap, you want bandwidth, and you want the place you're getting it from and serving it from to be trustworthy. And work checked off 3 of those, but it wasn't capacious. So we went to hosting providers. Hosting providers may be cheap, maybe not, and they maybe have capacity and maybe not. So that kind of didn't work out well, but that's kind of what we're stuck with. We also have mirrors that you can use. You have 2 types of software mirrors. You have people who volunteer to go mirror your site, and especially in open source, this is very common. The problem with volunteer mirrors is that even though their heart's in the right place, and I'm grateful that people would offer this, somebody will say, I want to mirror Wireshark, and then 3 months later they forgot that they're mirroring Wireshark, and the server goes down, or they change jobs, and so it's not necessarily reliable. We also had one mirror that, sometimes they're shady. We had one mirror that they set up the mirror, and like maybe 3 or 5 years later, I went to check on the mirror, and hey, there were porn links all over it. So, what are you going to do? Commercial mirrors are a different matter entirely. Some commercial mirrors are just outright shady. We've had a couple that will stick on browser toolbar installers onto the package that we're serving, and that was not good. So that was a big deal. Nowadays, we just pay for serving. Most of our infrastructure is at Amazon. I'm sure a lot of people here use Amazon, or at least directly or indirectly. If you don't use Amazon, or even if you do, the thing to know about Amazon is that they offer a great cloud hosting. It's why they're the biggest cloud hosting provider in the world. Their services are awesome, if a bit confusing, but you have to manage costs with Amazon, or else you're going to pay them a lot of money. You can do that with servers by reserving servers. You can pay for reserved instances. You can pay for reserved databases. The thing you cannot reserve at Amazon is bandwidth. You can't pay for bandwidth ahead of time and save costs that way. It's always expensive all the time there. So that's why when you download Wireshark from one of our servers, it's from a place called DigitalOcean, because they're a lot cheaper. And they are actually pretty reliable. So as I've said a couple of times, community is very important. And it's very important that we make sure, this is great right now that you guys can talk to each other, but this doesn't happen the rest of the year. So we have to make sure that our users can communicate and help each other throughout the course of the year. Early on, that meant setting up mailing lists, because back in the late 90s, that's what you did. You set up mailing lists. That was about our only way you could communicate with each other. Well, that and IRC. There was a trend for a while for projects to set up an online forum, and we kind of skipped over that. I don't like forums as a method of support, because somebody will ask a question, there'll be 4 pages of wrong answers, and the right answer will be on the 5th page, and nobody will look at it. I much prefer the question and answer format, where you get to vote up an answer, and usually the correct answer floats up to the top, and that's why we have ask.wireshark.org instead of forum.wireshark.org. And actually, Ask has worked out pretty well over the years. It's mostly replaced the Wireshark user mailing list, but that's fine with me. We have a bug tracker, which other people have talked about. And let's see, code review system, unless you're a developer, you probably don't care about that, but it's nice to have. Probably the big thing, though, is SharkFest. I'm really impressed, and I'm very grateful that Janice puts in all the time for SharkFest, because that does set us apart, I think, having a conference, not only one conference per year, but now 2, maybe 3 conferences per year where people can get together and exchange knowledge about this industry and about using this, not only using Wireshark, but looking at packets in general. Let's see, we got about 3 minutes left, so I'll try to wrap up. This is the standard statistics slide, which I put in every keynote, but it's what people want to see. We serve about the safe number is 1 million downloads a month. That's the minimum number that I see, on our servers. And this is just the servers that we manage. I don't know how many people download Wireshark through Linux distributions or from other places like Mirrors or internal company distributions or whatever. But we have at least 1 million downloads a month. And most of those are for Windows, but that's because Windows has automatic updates. If macOS had automatic updates, I'm sure that the percentage would be different. And if we served up Linux packages, that number would be different as well. We're sitting at about 2487 protocols, maybe 88. I think by the time we release 3.0, we'll probably have about 2,500 protocols that we support and close to, but probably not quite, 200,000 display filter fields. So big numbers. We have a lot of contributors, and I'm always grateful for that. The confusing number is how many lines of code we have. It could be 2.5 million, could be 3.7 million. And the reason for that is this graph. This is a graph of the lines of code for the project by year, from the start to today, using 3 different utilities: slot count, clock, and toke. They're just these little utilities that people write that will count the lines of code in a directory. And I just picked 3 and ran them and came up with this. And you have 2 lines that are about the same and 1 line that is not. And that's because the blue line, slot count, ignores code that's been automatically generated. The other 2 lines, clock and toke, don't. They count all the lines of code. And even though we have this divergent graph, this tells us something useful. This tells us that we generate a lot of our code. That makes me happy. We generate about 1.2 million lines of code. I wish we generated more. This is something that I'm happy about and I want to do more of. The other thing to notice is that this past year we've kind of leveled off. We maybe even went down in lines of code, code that people wrote. This is not because we stopped writing code. It's because we kept writing code, some code, but we threw away a bunch of other code. We got rid of GTK, the GTK user interface. We deleted that in the code base, so that's no longer there. And that makes me happy. I mean, the project is 20 years old. We have 20 years of accumulated patches, and you have to get rid of stuff over time, or else you just accumulate a bunch of the word is technical debt, but it's just, you have to clean yourself up occasionally. But that code deletion kind of affects our release timeline. This is the lifetime, the release dates and supported lifetimes for the current and future releases. The thing to notice here is that I prefer to release a major version every summer, and we like to support that for 24 months. But because we're getting rid of code, we decided to extend the lifetime of 2.6 from 24 to, I think, 30 months. And then that brings us into another issue, which is the fact that I prefer to have a maximum of 3 active releases. I don't like having more than 4 releases because that's just a big hassle for me personally. And so the 3.0 lifetime is going to be a little bit shorter, and then next summer we'll get back into our regular release cadence. And that's the end.